short time or atypical work patterns, you need to have been in employment by on or after the 6th of March 2020. And you need to have lost your job or be temporarily laid off or have to have stayed at home to mind children because of the pandemic, or, and I think this is going to be a key one, you had to have ceased trading as a result of the pandemic. So the rate of payment is $350 per week, as most of you probably know. My firm understanding at the moment is that it's a taxable payment. So it's going to show up as the equivalent of job seekers benefit in the tax return at the end of the year if you do a Form 11, or they'll find a way to tax you if you don't do a Form 11, if you're just purely PAYE. What they usually do is they code it into your tax credits. They reduce your tax credits and claw back the tax that way. It's going to be paid for the duration of the pandemic. It was originally just a 6-week payment. Now the language they're using is the duration of the pandemic. I think everybody in social welfare hoped that might be 12 weeks, but I don't know what the answer to that is at the moment. There are 2 ways to apply for it. The first way is you download the paper form, which is still geared towards the previous payment. It refers to 6 weeks rather than the length of the pandemic. It's a 1-page, very simple form, but there are a few trip-ups in it that if you tick the wrong box, you won't get it. But the much easier way to do it, so that's the paper form, the much easier way to do it is to do it through mygovid.ie. So mygovid.ie, which is the online application form. You can apply for, if you don't already have a MyGovID login, you can apply for one and still apply for the COVID. There are 2 levels to that. One of them is a very simple login. You just need to have your name, email address, and a password, and you can apply for it based on that. Or there's a verified account if you're looking for more applications to other things on that platform. My understanding is that they've changed it that you can apply for the COVID pandemic payment through a very simple login. So if you don't already have a login, it should be easy to get one and to make the payment through that. If all else is failing and you don't want to do the postal form, the intro offices still appear to be open 2 mornings a week. I think it is. Maybe the one down the road for me, the Cork Street one, is open on Monday and Wednesday from 9 to 12. So that's very broadly what the payment is. So just to kind of recap who it's intended for, it's very narrow. It's people who have specifically lost their employments due to the pandemic, and with revenue, or social welfare and revenue can track who is in employment on the dates between the 16th and 30th of March, because revenue are getting employment information in real time. Unlike, say, a year and a half ago where this wasn't real-time information, now revenue and social welfare have real-time information. So you have to have been in employment and lost your job around that time. And the way that they know you've lost it through the pandemic is you tell them that. You tick a box on the form that says, I've lost this from the pandemic. A few people have asked, can you still have some work dribbling in as employments, the old X's and O's schemes? You can't. You have to be completely unemployed. So there can't be any income coming in through an employment. I think somebody mentioned a little bit of lecturing income. I'm guessing that might be online lecturing. My understanding is that you can't still show up that on your record, on your kind of revenue record. My understanding is you won't get it. You have to have ceased everything. From a self-employed point of view, my understanding is that you now are in a situation where, while we all know you might be beavering away in the background planning stuff and everything else, my understanding that cease trading means no invoices should go out during this period. No invoices with dates on it during this period. Of course, you might have sent out an invoice 3 weeks ago, before the 13th of March, 4 weeks ago, and you might be paid during this period, but that's an invoice that's dated before that. You also might have meant to send out an invoice and just didn't get around to it, say on the 12th of March, in which case, you know, that was legitimately for work done before that. My feeling is that there has to be a little bit of latitude to understand that situation. In other words, an invoice hasn't quite gone out yet, but it goes out now, but is dated before the period. Now, I'm not in any way suggesting breaking revenues rules around these things, but you know, this is an unprecedented situation, and revenue and social welfare has to recognize that there's going to be a gray area between a person who's self-employed, has ceased trading, but still needs to get in invoices for the period when they were still trading. Okay, so that's kind of the rough kind of broad strokes on this. I'm going to now pick up the questions that Siobhan has given me and see if I can answer maybe the first few, and then maybe Siobhan can jump in with a few more questions. Yep. So the first one I was thinking is that Siobhan has asked me to kind of define who is a freelance artist in the eyes of the Department of Social Protection and also with revenue. Revenue is my main area of expertise. If you earn more than €5,000 in self-employed income after expenses in a tax year, so I'm just going to repeat that, more than 5,000 in self-employed non-PAYE income after you've taken off your legitimate expenses in a tax year, which is a calendar year, then you are what's known as a chargeable person. And you have an obligation to register for income tax, which is revenue's way of saying register as self-employed. It's called register for income tax, and do a self-employed Form 11 tax return. I've thrown a lot of jargon at you there now, so I'm just going to break that down a little bit. A lot of people will already have done this, but some people might not. If you earn more than $5,000 after expenses, then you are supposed to register as self-employed with revenue. You don't have to do it. You're supposed to do it as it happens, but you don't have to. A lot of people come to me, say, in September of a year to tell me that they had self-employed income from the previous year that they know they're supposed to declare. So what I do at that point is I register them for income tax, register them as self-employed from the 1st of January of the previous year, and I do a tax return before the October deadline in the following year. So that's what a self-employed person is from revenue's perspective. I know at least one person has asked the question, what if I did start trading as a self-employed person, started getting in self-employed income, which includes bursary income after legitimate expenses, which includes fees from companies where you're not being treated as a self-employed person. It includes commissions if you're a writer. Now, again, you're always keeping an eye on that $5,000 figure. What if that person had every intention of registering with revenue to do an income tax return for 2019, but they haven't got around to it yet? My understanding and my experience has been that people in that situation should still be qualified for the pandemic payment. And I know at least one person has done that. What they did was they filled in the pandemic form, they ticked the box that they're self-employed, and at the same time they went on and registered as self-employed with revenue. So those people who are kind of, shit, I haven't done it yet, but I need to do it, my feeling is that they're still eligible because they're self-employed. They haven't done the return yet or registered yet, but they're about to, or they do it at the same time. And just to kind of, how do you register physically? How do you register? If you have a My Account login, there's a registrations button down the bottom of the homepage, and you just register for income tax from, say, the 1st of January 2019, or earlier, if you want to do it from earlier or later, that still should be okay. So that's kind of a situation of, and then there's another, so sorry, that's my very broad answer to the question. Define who is a freelance artist in the eyes of the department and revenue. I've kind of given it to you from revenue's perspective. From the Department of Social Protection's point of view, it's a trickier question to answer. 2 years ago, the department didn't have such a thing as job seekers benefit for self-employed people, and now they do. And basically, the department are tracking self-employed people by their self-employed contributions, which they make through their tax return. In fact, I'm not going to go into that level of detail at this stage because I feel it might confuse rather than clarify. I've got a few questions about people who are freelance versus people who are self-employed. In my mind, a freelance person can be a freelance self-employed person or a freelance PAYE worker that goes from one PAYE job to either unemployment where they're signing on as job seekers allowance or not signing on at all onto another freelance PAYE engagement. Those people in my mind are PAYE workers. They're not self-employed. They haven't registered with revenue as self-employed, so they're just going from one PAYE contract to another. In my mind, unless they were in employment in that key period between the 6th of March and the 13th of March, they're probably going to struggle to get this payment unless they now declare themselves as self-employed, whatever that might mean to them. I mean, I'm not suggesting someone declares themselves as self-employed that is not self-employed, but you know, I'll just leave that with you. So that's kind of covering who's freelance artists and who's self-employed. Does that kind of make sense? I'm gonna bring up other people's faces and see if people are nodding or shaking their head. A few noddings. That's helpful enough. And don't worry if that made no sense, but you need to follow up. You know, we have the facility to do that kind of in about 20 minutes or so. Okay. I've got a few questions here that kind of might be. Yeah. Siobhan also asked, what's the difference between a casual worker and a part-time worker, which are both mentioned on the pandemic unemployment payment form. That's the paper form. Casual workers and part-time workers are still eligible for job seekers payments. And I feel that the reason, and they break them down, a casual worker might be someone who maybe does like a week of work, then a week off, then a week off, or they might be in 2 days a week, 3 days a week. Part-time worker might be a week on, week off. The reason I think that question is asked is that if you're receiving any payment at all through employment, you're not eligible for the pandemic payment. And they're going to push you to one of the other supports, which might be, I think it's called short-term workers. So you apply for job seekers and you let them know you're still doing a day or two a week. So my feeling is that the reason that's on the form is that if you tick yes to that, you probably won't get the pandemic. But I'll be happy to hear from people who have ticked yes on that and are still getting the pandemic, because this is all so brand new and I'm still getting feedback from people, even this morning before we went on this call. I've got a question here. I'm an actor and I've been on the dole job seekers payment. Now it doesn't clarify if it's job seekers allowance or job seekers benefit since Monday the 2nd of March, but have also had my next acting job due to start in May cancelled. Can I claim the pandemic unemployment payment now, or do I have to wait until the cancelled rehearsal commencement date to claim it? My understanding is that person is, if that's all that's going on, that they don't have a self-employed registration, my understanding is that that person is not eligible. And if they apply in May, at the time the job is going to be cancelled, it's not going to make any difference. If they put down the date that it should have been, it's going to, computer says no on the form with revenue, or what, with the Department of Social Protection. But, and this is kind of a slight segue, Anna at Theatre Forum and Theatre Forum are doing great work in terms of talking to the Department of Culture about broadening out the definition of what might make people eligible for this payment. They're trying to make the argument that particularly Galway got cancelled recently and people have lost big chunks of what would have been PAYE work or self-employed work. So what happens in that scenario? Someone who legitimately thought they had 3 months of PAYE work lined up with Galway, and now that's not going to happen. So Anne is talking to the Department of Culture about that and hoping to expand out the rules to cover people who would have been starting a PAYE engagement, and also people who perhaps worked in January and February in PAYE engagements and we're hoping to start another one, say at the end of March or whatever. So that's a kind of a slight segue, the work that Theatre Forum is doing. I also want to, and people are responding to the ticking the part-time working box. Yes, some people ticked the part-time working box and still got the payment. I'm delighted to hear that. That's great. There's 2 people who said that and still got the payment. Great. Okay. See, I'm, as I say, I'm still figuring out these rules myself, and also trying to interpret them as broad as possible so that people do get the payment. And also Tom Creed said he's going to give an update on the conversation with the department from the National Campaign for the Arts point of view later on. Thanks, Tom. Okay. There's a person here saying that they're an actor and they're resting on the March the 12th and not claiming any social welfare because of jobs coming up later in the year, and they're asking, should they claim the pandemic unemployment payment? Again, if this actor is not claiming social welfare, I'm hoping that they're also registered as self-employed and should go for the payment as a self-employed person rather than confusing it or not getting it as an employed person. I don't know if that's clear, I hope it is. Someone has asked the question, and this is a question that I've seen not just in the world of arts, but in other worlds as well. Someone is a part-time PAYE worker in a Dublin venue, and a lot of the full-time colleagues have gone on the temporary wage subsidy scheme, which provides for people staying on as employees and getting either 350 or 410 through the employment that the employer then gets refunded back from the department through revenue. And they're wondering, as a part-time worker, would they be better off to apply for the pandemic unemployment payment? So in that scenario, they might get more under the pandemic payment. They might have been a part-time worker on, say, been on 250, and they can go for the pandemic unemployment payment of 350. My understanding, and I'm not talking about the morals of this, is that my understanding is that if somebody does that, they should be eligible for the 350 payment because it's a blank payment and it doesn't have the nuance to kind of go, well, what were you on before? So in that situation, from a technical point of view, my understanding is that person, if they were in employment and have lost their employment due to the pandemic, now that this person doesn't say in that scenario, are they leaving it voluntarily? If they're leaving it voluntarily, the form won't allow you to get the payment if you make a comment like that. So you're effectively saying you've lost your employment through the pandemic payment. Okay. There's another one here about the COVID-19 payment and can they apply for the Arts Council's crisis response award and account for it in the annual return at the end of the year. So there's a couple of different things in there. The Arts Council crisis response payment, which I know there's been a lot of conversations about anyway this week, my understanding is originally in the guidance, there was a comment that you couldn't apply for the crisis payment, the Arts Council crisis payment, and stay on the pandemic payment. I think that piece of guidance has now been removed from the guidelines. I searched around for it this morning, and the only place that I thought I was seeing it before, the frequently asked questions, it seems to have been edited. Now, I'm not sure if it's still sitting somewhere else, but it seems to be gone. So I think that's the Arts Council recognizing that this is more complicated. For example, you might legitimately get the crisis response payment of $3,000, probably mangling the words there. You might get that, but there might be legitimate costs to go against it, reducing your payment. And it wouldn't be fair to take that person off the $350 a week. You know, the two things shouldn't be mutually exclusive. Someone has asked, I'm in receipt of job seekers benefit, and I'm wondering if I'm eligible to apply for the Arts Council's COVID-19 Crisis Response Award and account for it in my annual return at the end of the year. My understanding is both the pandemic payment and the Arts Council's crisis payment are probably taxable payments that will end up in your tax return anyway. If you can apply for the Arts Council's COVID crisis response payment and still keep on your job seekers benefit payment, I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer that question, to be honest. But we can discuss that, and perhaps people can even feed back. Someone has asked about, I'm an actor in receipt of the state pension and my upcoming tour has been cancelled. Can I apply for the pandemic unemployment payment? And later on, there's another question where somebody has said, the revenue have stipulated that self-employed people outside the specified age are not eligible for the COVID payment, and that self-employed people still pay their taxes on all income less allowable expenses, so this seems unfair. My understanding is that the reason they've given the ages between 16 and 66 is that after 66, you no longer pay PRSI you no longer pay PRSI. You become PRSI exempt because and that's just the rules. That's the way it is. And this payment is coming out of the Department of Social Protection's budget. And if you're not paying into it, that's my understanding is that's why you're not eligible for it. In the same way that if you were on the state pension, not allowed to go in and get job seekers allowance. That's the only thing I can understand from that. So while you are paying tax, income tax and USC, you're not paying PRSI. If that makes sense. Even if you've got self-employed income, you'll notice that the PRSI on the self-employed, there shouldn't be any amount there. If there is, you should go back and claw it back from revenue. But if they know your age, that automatically doesn't get included. If they can see that you're over 66, there won't be a minimum PRSI payment on self-employed income. Before I hand back to Siobhan, I'm going to see, is there anything else that's kind of easy to, there's one about the back to work enterprise allowance. So this person is a playwright, and last year the department directed them to the back to work enterprise allowance scheme, and the next play has been pulled, and they're wondering if they're ineligible for the pandemic unemployment payment. God, that's a really good question. I don't know. That person should, my instinct on these things is that if you're not sure if you're eligible for the pandemic payment, apply for it anyway, and then let me know if you don't get it or if you do get it, and we can kind of figure it out a little bit more. My feeling is that person is probably going to automatically not get it because it's going to show up that they've got another payment coming through. But if that person, back to work enterprise allowance, the idea behind that is that they push you off the live register and they push you on, they give you support for 2 years. That support they give you doesn't give you any PRSI contributions, unlike job seekers benefit. So effectively they're saying you're now on your own, but you're allowed to trade and make money as a playwright and other things. So in that scenario, you can no longer trade. Your trade has ceased. So maybe there's a kind of a leeway whereby, because you're getting that payment, but you can no longer cease, you should get the pandemic payment because you should be in a position where you should be able to be sending out invoices and the job seekers allowance, the back to work enterprise scheme could be separate to the sending out of invoices. So if that situation wants to, someone has said, I'm on back to work and got it. Great. So this person is saying, I'm on back to work and as a self-employed and ceased trading, I was eligible, but I did pay PRSI in 2019 and 2018. Okay. My feeling is that person should apply and let me know what happens. Siobhan, will I hand back to you at this stage?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we will get Tom Creed in now in a moment to talk about the the campaign
Great.
and the discussions with the department. But before we do that, Peter, maybe you might just sort of give some little bit more detail and following up on these questions with a question from somebody who's a production manager saying, I've been claiming the Department's social protections reduced self-employment payment based on last year's earnings. With no foreseeable job as a production manager in the next few months, am I entitled to the COVID payment? And if yes, what documentation do I need to have to claim it?
So
what
that's,
you need to have?
This strikes me as, this scenario strikes me as a little bit unfair, because in that scenario, that person, I'm guessing, was signing on for job seekers benefit self-employed payment in or around the 6th of March to the 13th of March. And my understanding, if you're already on job seekers, and again, I'd be happy to hear from people, if you're already on job seekers, they didn't up the payment from 203 to 350, which created this very unfair scenario. I'm just going to kind of see, I'm going to watch the chats here to see if anybody says actually they did for me. But my understanding in that scenario is that they weren't willing to up the payment. Again, I'm watching to see if anybody says, yes, they did it for me. And I don't know how that person could kind of, I don't know, cease their previous claim and then go back on and claim for pandemic. I don't know what that would do. Would that mess them up completely? I don't know. Sorry.
Okay.
Seems very unfair.
That seems very unfair. Yeah.
Can I go into job seekers benefit self-employed just for 2 or 3 minutes? Job seekers benefit self-employed is a relatively new payment, and it's the equivalent of, people used to say if you were self-employed and you went into tried to get some job seekers, you couldn't get anything back in it because you hadn't paid what are known as A1 contributions or A contributions, which are the contributions you pay each week you have a PAYE job. They recognized there was an unfairness in that. So about 2 years ago, they come up with this scheme, and the parameters within which you're eligible are as follows. You have to have at least 104 Class A contributions since you started work, whatever number of years ago, or at least 156 Class S contributions. 156 Class S contributions means you have to have been self-employed for at least 3 years. But the bar is quite low there, because if you started work 5 years ago and you have some A contributions, say 10 in each year, plus at least 2 years of self-employed, or even 1 year, you might just make it to 104, 156 or 104. So that bar, I might feel it's not that hard unless you're just brand new in the workforce, which is similar to, it's the same bar there is for people getting job seekers benefit, not self-employed. You still have to have at least 104A or 156 Class S. After that, you need to have 52 Class S contributions in what is known as the relevant year. The relevant year is always 2 years before you go in and apply. So if you go in and apply in 2020, they look back to 2018. The reason for that is that 2019, most people haven't done their tax returns, or they haven't got the information from employers, so they go back 2 years. So if you had at least 5 grand of self-employed income in your tax return in 2018, which you can still do now, might be a little bit of a late payment penalty, but if the tax bill isn't that high, it's only 10% of the tax bill. If your tax bill is €500, it's an extra €50. So if you have at least 5 grand in self-employed income in 2018, that will give you a minimum self-employed tax bill of €500, which will give you 52 Class S contributions. You still have to tick the box of 104 Class A or 156 Class S. So yeah, that payment is relatively new, but they give it to you for the same lengths of time that they give job seekers benefit. I think it's 6 months or 9 months, depending on how much contributions you have. It's supposed to bolster you in between self-employed jobs.
Peter, you gave all those figures and calculations and S's and classes.
Yeah.
Really showing your accountancy background and your good acting experience for your storytelling behind it. But I think for a lot of people, guys are glazing over now, going, "Oh my God, that's all very complicated."
Yeah,
it's not that complicated as I understand it, but you might just go back again, repeat some of that, and also there should be no panic. There still is time to address that.
Absolutely.
And people have accountants, or find an accountant, or come to you, or come to us, and we'll help you sort these issues out.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'll recap it quite. I'll break it down a little bit. For each when you're working as a PAYE worker, it's done by week. So if you get a job and you're 12 weeks in the Abbey and you're earning above a certain, in fact, 12 weeks in the Abbey, you're going to have 12 class A1 contributions at the end of that gig. Each time you get a pay slip, you'll see PRSI class written on it, and almost always it's A. If you're over the age of 66, it's usually class J, which means you're not paying any PRSI. So each time you do a PAYE job, you get, and for each week you work in a PAYE job, you get one class A contribution. For someone who's in a full-time job, when they look at what used to be issued, the P60, which is no longer issued anymore, but if they looked at that at the end of the year, they would see at the bottom right-hand corner, it would usually say 52 class A1 contributions. That's almost always the case with PAYE workers. If somebody is a self-employed person, and by self-employed, I mean they do a Form 11 tax return and declare self-employed income in addition to PAYE income, so it's in addition to or without. So just as long as they have at least £5,000 worth of self-employed income, that person will pay a minimum of 500 PRSI as part of their tax bill. If you go back and dig out a tax return, you'll see it as part. It'll have PRSI and there'll be an amount there. As long as they've paid something there, they'll get. When you're self-employed, it's done by years. They give you 52 class S if you have at least £5,000 of self-employed income. So you never get less than 52, you never get more. If you have a MyGov ID login, you can go and check to see what your contributions are to date. There's a little button there, and they'll either give it to you on the screen, or they'll send it out to you by post, depending on whether or not you've got a verified account. You can look back over, since you started working, what are your contribution records like? And you can look at them, or I can look at them and go, right, if you walked into social welfare now, you would get job seekers benefit for a PAYE worker, or you would get job seekers for a self-employed, or you wouldn't. You can if you get to know them, you can read them. Also, each year you're contributing towards your contributory state pension. But that's another day's conversation, and one that anybody can have with me at any stage. So I hope that's given a little bit of, so how do you find out about your contributions? Go on to mygovid.ie and either get it online if you have a verified account, or get it sent out to you in the post, which might take a week or so. But if you have an instinct that you are eligible for job seekers, if you're not getting anything at the moment and the pandemic doesn't apply for you, you might still be eligible for one of the other supports, which is either job seekers allowance, which is means tested. In other words, you haven't got any income coming up and you have not a huge amount of resources in your bank account. They'll give you the means tested payment, which is job seekers allowance, or they'll check to see if you're eligible for either job seekers benefit as a PAYE worker, which in most of our scenarios, in most of our cases, if you're freelance going from one job to the next, you don't tend, because it's quite a high bar to jump over, but you might be eligible for the job seekers benefits self-employed payment. Citizens Advice is a very good resource for all these things. The welfare website I find is not as good, but Citizens Advice is very good.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a question in there from saying, I applied for supplementary welfare as I have 1 day a week part-time job through gov.ie, not the COVID-19 payment. They've given me the pandemic payment, but emailed to say that I will be properly assessed as per normal once they get through the pandemic payments.
Yeah, that strikes me as a response that is, my feeling is that what they're doing at the moment is they're just giving it to as many people as they can. And then they're, as part of the online process, so a client sent this to me, they screen grabbed it and sent it to me. As part of that, at the very end, once you've submitted it, they tell you you're going to have to apply for job seekers during the kind of 12-week period to make sure that you've got continued support. Now, it doesn't say you have to, but it say you should apply for that. I did wonder, were they going to try and reconcile what you got during this period with what you were eligible for? And if there was no eligibility at all, would they try and claw it back? It doesn't seem like they're going to do that, but I can't say for sure that they're not going to do that. But there's somebody applying for supplementary welfare. I can see who it is, but I won't give the name out. If that person would like to say what exactly they mean by supplementary welfare, because there are a few things there. There's like short-term working, and there's like job seekers benefit, but where you're getting a day or two. They want to kind of give a little bit, That would be great. A little bit more information on that, because as it sounds like that person didn't apply for the COVID-19 payment, but they've given them the pandemic payment. There was also a period at the very start of this where the pandemic payment was the same value as the job seekers, and people made applications and were automatically, the amount was increased. And I just wonder, during that period, was an application made that has then been bumped up the pandemic payment? I'm not 100% sure.
Peter, will people have heard by now if they applied in the last 2 weeks, will everybody have heard if they're getting the payment?
Not necessarily. What they're doing is that if you get your application in by the Thursday, then you should know if you've got the payment by the following Tuesday. And my firm understanding on that is that it's an online application that they're able to make that commitment. Because in other words, if somebody gets something in the post by Thursday evening, I would imagine it's going to be the Tuesday week that they'll get the payment. So I had a few clients get on to me who didn't get the payment in the first Tuesday, and we tried to figure out what was going wrong. Had they ticked the wrong box on something? And in some cases, we went back and applied again. And what the department says is that if you haven't got it and you're not sure if you're going to get it, just apply again. You won't get a duplicate payment. So in other words, the PPS number will make sure you're not getting a duplicate payment. But if you feel you did something wrong in the first application, for example, if you put down an employment that finished 2 months ago rather than typing it in as a self-employed person, then it might be worth going back and doing it again. In some cases, the people who hadn't got it by the first payment date, which is a couple of weeks ago, did get it by yesterday's payment. So if you applied online by last Thursday, my understanding is that if you didn't get it yesterday, something might be wrong.
And Peter, another question that came into us on ITI was, I received the COVID payment last week. Today I heard I've been awarded a bursary for 2020 from the Arts Council. Does this disqualify me from getting the COVID payment, or is there an accounting solution I could consider? Have no problem paying whatever tax is due, just don't want to lose out financially.
Okay, yeah. First of all, the bursary, just to kind of go on a slight, but I hope for useful segue, the bursary is taxable in your hands. So, you know, if you get a bursary from the Arts Council, it is taxable. If you also have artist exemption as a writer, a musician, a painter, or a composer, then, and the bursary isn't in order for you to spend time doing those things, then it is artist exempt income. But that still means you pay PRSI and USC on it. If you get the bursary and you don't have artist exemption, it's taxable, but you're allowed to deduct legitimate costs from it. So in case if you use the bursary to go and do stuff that costs you money, and the things I'm thinking of is you use the bursary to go and travel somewhere to do a bit of research, my feeling is that that's all tax deductible off it. So that's kind of to give you a rough sense of, is a bursary taxable in the first place? In that person's scenario, my feeling is that if you've applied for a bursary and it is to give you the time to do certain things, and you no longer feel you can do that because of the pandemic. So say, for example, even if the bursary is for you as a writer to do this, but you have to stop everything because you don't have the space at home to write, it's just too chaotic, and that's not what you plan to do. You plan to go and write in either ITI or in cafes, whatever, and that's not available to you, then in my mind, that person has ceased trading, and they can argue that the bursary is going to kick in after the point at which they cease trading, if that makes sense. I feel that argument can be made. Now, somebody might come and poke holes in it, but I feel I could firmly argue against that person poking home. For example, they could say, well, that person could have just done whatever they were doing at home. And I go, yeah, they could have, but they didn't. They ceased trading because of, these are the reasons they ceased trading. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's hard to focus on the type of work that a bursary is giving you the money to do in the backdrop of a global pandemic. That to me is a strong enough argument. Mm-hmm.
And then the others are people, you know, people came in to talk to us about the fact that they had been awarded a bursary and they thought by having the bursary, they shouldn't go for COVID.
Yes, it's a good question. I think the same answer applies. Yeah. And I think that in that scenario, if the person can, hand on heart, if the person is a self-employed person, so they're going for it as a self-employed person, that their trade has ceased. If they can hand on heart say that their trade has ceased, then they should apply for that. To give you an example with a bursary and accounting solutions, I've had a few clients over the years that have received bursaries, say in December. They've drawn down the payment in December, and it might be a payment of say 13 or 15 grand, but they don't do anything with it until the following year. I am very comfortable in deferring that income on that person's balance, that person's theoretical balance sheet. I'm not giving that balance sheet to anybody, to revenue, whatever else. I'm just saying that if they received a bursary and it was to buy them time for 6 months or for 12 months or 9 months, and they receive, say, just to make it easy to work with, say they receive 9 grand to do them for 9 months and they get it in December, I'll put 1 grand of that person's bursary income in that year's tax return, and I'll take the other 8 grand and put it in the following. And I think that's fine. So in that scenario, that person may have received the money, but they're parking it, they're deferring it until they're in a position to recommence trading and going on. Again, somebody can poke holes in it. That's what they do. That's what revenue will do in the normal course of events, and that's what Department of Social Protection will do as well. Although Department of Social Protection, I imagine, are operating within a much narrower set of rules than revenue normally would. I'm conflating things there, but yeah.
We're getting questions now from people. When you say bursary, is a bursary the equivalent of the new Arts Council Crisis Award? Or is the Crisis Award the equivalent of the bursary? Like, can you treat the two of them the same? Or
I would think so, yeah.
Are...
As I say, almost all income that comes from the Arts Council is taxable in your hands. Now, people might go, oh, Jesus Christ, I've never done a tax return for money I've got from the Arts Council. Sometimes it's an in and out. If you get a training award, it's just going to pay for training. And in that scenario, say, for example, someone has no other self-employed activity and they get even a 3 grand training award and they spend it all on 3 grand worth of expenses. That person has 0 taxable income. So that person doesn't have that 5 grand, which automatically makes them have to register as self-employed. So in that scenario, that person shouldn't be frightened. The bursary, to me, is self-employed income in the hands of the individual who's getting it. It's money to do something. So my feeling is that it's to be treated in the same way as a bursary. And if you can legitimately put costs against it, for example, if that person has got the 3 grand and they have to go out and spend money on the equipment that's going to make them put them in a position to give this online presentation of the work, and that equipment, you know what I mean? It's reducing the taxable award. Does that make sense?
Yeah, then I'm not sure if you can actually spend the money. I need to check that myself in the guidelines. Can you spend 3,000 on equipment?
No, in fact, they're saying that you specifically can't, but that's from their own eligibility point of view.
Yeah.
What happens in your tax return is a slightly different thing.
Yeah, sure. Just to be clear on that. Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Pardon me there, Peter. I might just throw in here because we've gotten 1 or 2 questions privately to the ITI account.
Sure, yeah.
I'll just read out here.
Yeah.
So the first question we've gotten is, should we receive correspondence to confirm we are to receive the emergency payment or not? This person has received none to date.
Yeah, Department of Social Protection has said that, yeah, they will write out to people to tell them if they haven't got them and they haven't got it and why they haven't got it. But they also said that there would be a delay on that because of everything else that's going on. So I think that I don't know of anybody that's heard back why they haven't got it. I just know people haven't got it because no money has arrived in their bank account. So yeah, they're going to write out to people. And if they do write out to you, you always have redress. You can always go back and appeal it within 21 days. And in a scenario whereby people didn't fully, say they applied as an employee thinking that's how they should do it, and then it turns out that they're not eligible because they weren't in employment during that window, but are eligible by virtue of being a self-employed, that person should be able to go back and apply as a self-employed. And my instinct is that they should get it backdated. That's the way all these payments work. If that makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Lee.
We just did the second part of that question then was the emergency payment online application form prompted me to apply for job seekers. Is applying for both as they encouraged online a problem?
No, my only feeling about that is that if you apply for, look, I'm sure if you were eligible for the pandemic, then it will continue to be paid to you at the rate of $350 until the pandemic is over. The job seekers is, my feeling is that my instinct, and again, I'm happy for people to say it, actually, that doesn't feel right, is to not apply for job seekers until we get to the end of this and you know what's going to happen next. For example, say we have 12 weeks of a pandemic, and after the end of the 12 weeks, things start to pick up and you're in a position as a self-employed person to start sending invoices again. In that scenario, that person shouldn't apply for job seekers because they're no longer available for work. Their trade has picked back up. If that person is a PAYE worker and now they are still looking for work, they should apply for job seekers either as a PAYE worker if they're eligible, or as a self-employed people if they've no trading income. My fear is that if you apply for, no, it's a silly fear. So yeah, my feeling is that apply for job seekers, but maybe leave it, don't apply for it straight away, if that makes sense. I think that in the original form where the pandemic payment was going to be for 6 weeks, it made sense to start applying for job seekers because the support would run out after 6 weeks and you'd have to have something there for you at the end of 6 weeks. Now that it's for the length of the pandemic, I feel the urgency to apply for job seekers is taken away a little bit, as long as you're getting the 350. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Kind of.
We have another question, Peter. Basically, it's an actor who was in a show that was cancelled during the period, and the company put everybody on the wage subsidy scheme.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay.
And they understand that the contract was due to end on the 18th of April.
Yeah.
After the 18th of April, can they then apply for the COVID payment?
I think they should be in a position to do that. And the reason for that is that they've lost their job as a result of the pandemic. That's what we're saying.
Yeah.
Now that I think about it, yeah. My feeling is, but I'll be happy to get feedback of what happens to that person. But my instinct is that should be what'll show up in that position, with that case, from department's point of view, is that this person was in employment and now they're no longer in employment. As I say, they get that in real-time information. And if they fill in the form at that point and say that the reason they've lost their job is because of the pandemic, then my feeling is that they should be eligible.
Okay, I'll check that.
Now, again, I'd be interested to hear from anybody who was in employment after the 17th, say until maybe the 31st or something, and then their PAYE job finished and they applied for the payment and they got it. If anybody's in a position in that. Also, I see that somebody is saying that they did get the letter telling them why they didn't get it. They couldn't read the form, okay? And it took about a week and a half to get this letter, and have since reapplied and got it. Okay, like, it's a simple, the reason that Department of Social Protection have said the reasons that they have been not in a position to pay people have been things like they put the PPS number in incorrectly on a paper form. They included a bank account number rather than an IBAN. The date of birth was wrong, or the date of birth was not filled in, because that's one of the ways they verify that this person is the person they're saying they are. My instinct is that if you haven't got it yet and you're not sure, go online to MyGovID and reapply for it. As I say, you can't get it twice.
And just be clear, Peter, for people, if you do get it, just what are the liabilities at the end of the year on this money?
So job seekers benefit is taxable and job seekers allowance is not taxable. The way that job seekers benefit gets taxed is that if you start another employment within the year, they reduce your tax credits and they get it back that way. And job seekers benefit is taxable, but you also get the PAYE tax credit, which if that's all you've had that year, there'll be no tax bill on it. My feeling is that the pandemic payment is going to be the same. It's going to show up as taxable income if you do your Form 11 after the year. Form 11 is for self-employed people. There's a panel on it that says PAYE number 2, and on that is any taxable payments you receive from the Department of Social Protection. That includes job seekers benefit. It also includes back to work, short-term back to work enterprise allowance, not the 2-year one, but the 9-month one. My feeling is that it also includes job seekers benefit self-employed. My feeling is that the pandemic payment is going to show up as taxable income. Now, when I say taxable income, it doesn't get hit with USC and it doesn't get hit with PRSI. So it just gets taxed with the first of the 3 taxes, which is income tax. Income tax only kicks in if you have taxable income of 16.5 grand or more. So if you're looking down the barrel of 2020, where you've got the pandemic payment for, let's just pick a number that's easy to work with, 12 weeks, which is around 4 grand worth of income, and a little bit of self-employed and a little bit of PAYE that doesn't bring you above 16 grand, there'll be no tax bill. But if you have a really good rest of the year, let's be hopeful and positive here. Say you get a fantastic commission, or you get PAYE work from September to the end of the year that brings you above that 16 grand, then the pandemic payment will push you above, and that will be taxed at whatever your tax rate is, probably 20%. as I say, you don't have to worry about USC and PRSI because they don't kick in on social welfare payments. And unless you're earning overall above 35,300 in the year, you won't go into the 40% tax bracket. So the best that can happen on this COVID payment is that you'll get no tax bill on it. The worst that will happen is you get taxed at either 20% or 40% of the payment.
Hi there, sorry Peter, I might just come back in here just because I'm seeing a lot in the chat there.
Yeah.
If it's okay, we might bring in Tom Creed for a moment there, just to kind of talk about the National Campaign for the Arts and their response. 1 moment there, let me spotlight him.
Hi everyone. Just briefly, because obviously there is a National Campaign for the Arts meeting coming up this afternoon, I'd encourage you all to register. It's at 2:30. We'll be sending out the link just after 1 o'clock. So I'll put the Eventbrite link in the chat here if anyone wants to register, and we'll have a full update. Just to quickly answer Peter Power's question about the economic damage of project-based work, we have had sight of the initial figures from the Arts Council's survey of organisations, and we'll be able to share a few headline figures from that information, which is really substantial in terms of the amount of losses that organisations have suffered and the number of artists and arts workers who have lost work. Obviously, to capture that, the real effect on individual artists, people need to fill out the Arts Council's survey, which is due tomorrow. They've turned around the organizations one fairly quickly, so we're hoping that they'll be able to collate the individual artists and arts workers info soon. But I would say, so that can be gathered, we need everybody to fill out the Arts Council survey, and we'll get sight of those figures soon. Just a couple of points. There are a number of industries that have kind of seasonal work where particularly the hotel and B&B industry and various tourist industries where there's a lot of seasonal workers whose work hasn't kicked in yet. And that sector is doing a lot of lobbying to have the COVID payment potentially apply to people who will lose work that hasn't happened yet. So that hasn't happened, but in a way we're going to kind of draw from the National Campaign from the Arts point of view, we're going to draw a little bit on that kind of lobbying, because I think it will set precedents for all of the lost artistic work that potentially will be happening over the summer. So I think we're going to be kind of keeping an eye on that, and our conversations with the department are structured around that. I think there's another big issue, which is that in a way the art sector is will be first in, last out in terms of this crisis. The theatres and art galleries and concert venues all closed the day the lockdown happened. But of course, we're not going to be able to be putting work on stage or opening exhibitions the day that the restrictions are lifted. So I think there is a potential case to be made for the COVID payment to apply to arts workers for longer. Because if festivals, if it's not possible to get into rehearsals for summer and autumn festivals, then that work won't happen. Then future touring that's based on that might not happen. So that's another kind of piece of lobbying that we're going to be doing. We can talk a little bit more about that in the meeting this afternoon. In terms of the Arts Council scheme, we're calling on the Arts Council to review and reimagine that scheme. I noticed that, as Peter mentioned, and I think as I've put in the comments, they have taken out the clause in the frequently asked questions that says that you can't receive the COVID payment if you receive that Arts Council Crisis Response Award. But actually they're dodging the question, because basically what they're saying is we can't comment on your social welfare. My understanding is that the way that's put together, the Arts Council scheme is considered a grant to do work during this period. So Peter might have a better idea about how that might affect work. But for example, I think if you got that grant, you could pay yourself your normal wage for a few weeks and potentially go back on the COVID payment after that time. I'm not sure, but that's my impression of how it works. Kind of those are the kind of key points from an NCFA point of view, particularly those two things about lobbying in terms of the arts being treated like other sectors. The other thing, of course, that's happening is that we understand that there is now a draft programme for government between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and we'll also be drafting a response for the sector to send to politicians to make sure that culture is properly treated during the beginning of the life of the next government. So there'll be much more about all of this in the meeting at 2:30. Please sign up. Owen Carrick has put the link in the chat. Please do the Arts Council survey, because that's the main way that government will get sight of the losses. And I suppose the more we can all kind of contribute to this in as practical and as forward-looking a way as possible, I think the more we can achieve. That's kind of all I have to say.
Great, thank you, Tom. What I think would be, because we've only a few minutes left now, what I think would be great, Peter, would just be to kind of have a recap over some of the main points, but just from an ITI point of view, to encourage people to do consult citizens' information. I think their site is really clear and really good. Get professional advice, guys, if you're nervous, as well as Peter, you all have your own accountants, the people you're working with. And if you have issues around payment, maybe come to us in ITI and we'll see if there's a way in which we can provide some information clinics for people or help people with that. And you can email iti@info@irishtheatreinstitute.ie. Theatre Forum are our colleagues as well, and they're working very strongly, as Peter said earlier, in this area, and they will be having other meetings, and I think Anna and Irma may actually be on the link here today. And basically, I think we're trying to realise, we want everybody to kind of realise that it is a very tough time for everybody, and it's very hard to be thinking about making work when your head is full of whether or not you're going to get your social protection payments. So we're trying to find ways over the next while where we can, as Tom indicated there, find ways for government to understand the particular ways in which our sector works, especially the fact that so many people work all year round in theatre, but are actually in receipt of social job seekers benefit and allowance from much of it. So Peter, maybe you might just give us your final few things on the COVID payment.
Of course, yeah. Okay, actually, just before I do, I'm going to just pick up, I think, 3 questions here that I hadn't seen. Is there a process whereby a self-employed person can avail of the wage subsidy up to 410 rather than the COVID payment of 350? Not to my knowledge. The wage subsidy was for people who are PAYE, that their employer was going to let them go, but kept them on just to keep that link between employer and employee. And actually, the 410 subsidy available was for lower paid people. It was people for under 568 per week average wages in January and February, and the 350 was if you were between 560 and 950 or something, and if you were paid more than 950 there was no subsidy available to your employer. So the question was, can the self-employed person get the 410 rather than 350? Not to my knowledge. There was another one as well, somebody, and I think we kind of answered this, but it's worth looking at again. Someone is on the wage subsidy of 410 currently until the 18th of April when the job in question would have ended. Can they then apply for the COVID payment as a self-employed person who has ceased trading? My understanding is yes. So yeah, so to recap, if you haven't already, if you're already on the job seekers and you were getting it at kind of the lower rate, my understanding at the moment, the chances of you getting up to the 350, there doesn't seem to be a huge pathway unless there just doesn't seem to be a huge pathway, but I'm happy to be contradicted on that. If you haven't already got the payment and you're not sure whether or not you're eligible, my feeling is just apply for it. Apply for it on the mygovid.ie website. Do it online, it'll be processed faster. If you have applied by paper and you haven't heard anything yet, particularly if you've applied say over a week ago, go back online and apply for it again. If you've applied for it online and it was a week ago and you're now getting a bit of information from this session where you can go, fuck, I put employment, but I should have really picked self-employed. And the way you pick self-employed, in the employer name, just put self-employed, and in the employer's address, put your own address. And then further down, there's like 1 of 5 boxes to tick. It's the 5th one, I think, where it's self-employed and has ceased trading, and just apply for it on that basis. If you're in a position where you do feel you're self-employed, but you've never actually done anything about it, for example, you've never done a tax return, now might be a good time to go back to the start of 2019 and do one. Now, that's not going to make you qualify for job seekers benefit self-employed payment, because that needs to have been done in 2018 and you need to have a minimum payments. But if you do that, you are self-employed and you have ceased trading. I don't feel that they could, you know, based on the eligibility at the moment, my feeling is that you should get it under that position, and you can, hand on heart, fill in the form, say I'm self-employed and I've ceased trading. That's kind of all I've got. If anybody's any follow-ups, they're more than welcome to send me an email to peterdalytax@gmail.com. I'll do my best to respond. Now, I'm still working away on other stuff, so there might be a delay, or if I feel there's a lot of work involved, I might just maybe pick up the phone and we can have a chat. But I'll do my best to answer queries as best I can on a pro bono basis during this pandemic. So yeah, that's really all I've got at the moment. So yeah.
Thanks very much, Peter.
Peter.
We may have another session at some
of course.
but thank you so much for today, and thank you all very much, and thank you for all your questions, and we will be in touch. Thank you, guys.
Can I answer one more question?
Yeah.
Sorry, yes, someone has just said something about tax clearance. This is something I see a lot. Okay, yeah, so they ask you for tax clearance form if you apply for COVID-19 or self-employed. Yes, this person is giving the answer. Thank you, Claire Loy. If you don't have one, go onto Revenue site, which is either My Account if you have a My Account login, or Ross if you have a Ross login. And in the My Account, it's down the bottom, tax clearance, and at Ross, it's in the top right-hand corner. If you don't get it, they'll tell you why, and it's usually very easy to rectify. If anybody's having trouble with tax clearance, just drop me a line, peterdalytax@gmail.com, and I'll tell you how to get it. If you don't have a My Account login, now's the time to get one. And if you're already registered as self-employed, you do it through Ross. So I hope that's helpful. And
at this moment, Peter, the community are saying, Peter, you're a legend. Thank you, Peter.
We're all legends.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye-bye.